Joining me now is GB News host Darren Grimes. Darren, let's talk about quasi-blasphemy laws being introduced in the UK. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner is planning to create a council on Islamophobia to draw up an official government definition of what they deem to be anti-Muslim discrimination. Women's rights campaigner Ayaan Hirsi Ali calls it Sharia through the front door. Tell me, Darren, at a time when we are seeing a surge in anti-Semitism in the UK, why is the Labor government hell-bent on protecting Islam?
Yes, good to be with you again, Rita. I mean, you've just been spending time in the United States of America, where everything that's going on there seems to be in direct contrast to the hellscape that the Labour Party have unleashed upon Britain. You know, we are a country that has given the world so very much, and they seem absolutely intent to drag us back, kicking and screaming, to medieval times. You know, that's what I would argue Sharia and blasphemy law are. A drag back to medieval, the black age of this country. Now, why are they doing it now? I think it's actually to shore up the vote. And I think, frankly, they lost a lot of votes over the issue around Gaza and whether or not they acted fast enough there. So now they're seeking to actually win votes in other ways. And they're sacrificing Britain's freedom of expression for that goal, that ultimate goal that is guiding them right now. Angela Rayner herself, Rita, she was in a room not too long ago discussing Gaza with a room full of men, not a woman to be seen in that very room. All Muslim men, of course, because women aren't allowed in those kinds of rooms. We've seen segregation at Labour Party meetings to appease those with Islamic sentiment as well. And you never, ever would see any pandering of this nature in the name of Christianity. We just saw a preacher who had burnt a copy of the Quran actually have his name released by a police force in Britain, which means, I needn't explain that to you, that means that actually there is
Yes.
a target on his head. So things in Britain are deeply scary. And I think to talk about policies like this, the encroachment upon free speech, this will not be a chilling effect on speech. It'll be an ice age, Rita.
Now, we are seeing a fairly dramatic political realignment in the UK. This could be what has spooked the Labor Party. Reform, Nigel Farage's Reform, is now ahead of the Tories in every major poll. That's astonishing in itself, Darren, but even more astonishing is that Reform is now ahead of Labor in a major national poll. The YouGov poll taken on Sunday and Monday puts Reform ahead of Labor and the Tories. Will we see Tories and Reform come together, or are they going to continue to split the Conservative vote?
Listen, Rita, on everything that we've ever discussed week in, week out, whenever I've been on this show, for most of that time, there has been a Conservative government in this country. What has a Conservative government done? Well, it has allowed mass migration to come to this country. It allowed the economy to reach tax levels that we hadn't seen since the Second World War. Net zero, nuttier than a fruitcake, where we have the highest energy costs in the developed world. You know, why would Reform want to get together with a bag of fruitcakes? You know, I can remember David Cameron saying that Nigel Farage was a party full of raving fruitcakes and loons. Well, look what they did to the nation, and you can conclude something entirely different. This isn't short of anything other than a political earthquake, this polling. Reform ahead of the Tories, as you say. Labour in a national landslide. They won a landslide majority in just July of last year. This should be unthinkable in a first past the post electoral system. But people have had enough. They've had enough of the uni party, two cheeks of the same horrible old behind that cares more about global interests than it does the national interest. And the establishment have an utter contempt for the British public. And young people as well back in Reform and Nigel Farage, Rita. It really is feeling like there is an appetite for political revolution in this country. So I couldn't give a flying flamingo what the Conservatives want to do at this juncture. I am still hopping mad at them, and I think the rest of the country are too. Keir Starmer, though, he's finished as well, and not a moment too soon.
You are so right. The Tories have wasted power. They won elections in landslides and then governed like they were a Labor government as opposed to
Yep.
upholding conservative principles. It has been quite disgraceful, and it helps explain why in this poll it showed 1 in 4 Conservative voters who voted Tory just at the last election, they say they want to now back reform, and more than 4 in 10 Tory voters want to see the party merge with reform. So that just tells you how much trouble they're in. And as far as the Prime Minister goes, this isn't going to make Keir Starmer any more popular. We're learning now that as Britons were suffering under some of the toughest lockdowns anywhere in the world, some of your lockdown rules were just so oppressive. When that was happening, where people were kept from seeing family members, kept from attending funerals, Keir Starmer had meetings with a voice coach who was travelling between lockdown tiers to meet with him. Explain this to me, because Keir Starmer backed these lockdown rules there. He wanted them to be tougher, but he lived by different standards himself.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you've perfectly highlighted it. The rank hypocrisy of the man who had a demand after demand for Boris Johnson to resign over the damning affair around a piece of birthday cake in number 10 Downing Street, which, let's not forget, when he was Prime Minister, that was Boris Johnson's office. Yet, Sir Keir Starmer, little did we all know as a nation, and he sat there on his moral high horse. You know, he must have, I thought he was sat on the fence all this time, but he was clearly busy doing other things. I mean, the idea that a vocal coach is an essential worker, it's for the birds. This is the same government that put forward plans saying that Boris Johnson and the Conservatives were cronies who actually were there to feather their own nest. Well, this is a man, Keir Starmer, he couldn't even bring himself to say, free the hostages. And he's had a vocal coach. He actually ended up, Rita, saying, free the sausages. I kid you not. So this was a complete waste of money. It's a deceit on the British public. And once again, we're seeing that actually they might preach a good game, but in practice, they're just the same as the Conservative Party in almost every respect imaginable. And we, as a nation, have had enough.
And that explains why Reform is now sitting pretty ahead of Labor in a major national poll and ahead of the Tories in every poll in the country. Darren Grimes, thank you so much for your time this evening.